Era difícil saber en qué etapa del viaje estaba. Esta historia, que comenzó en Londres con el caracol de Temple Church, me había llevado a Katmandú, a Boston, a Medellín y a Madrid, a Los Ángeles, a Oslo, a París. Sin embargo, a veces sentía que había estado dando vueltas en círculo, saliendo y llegando al mismo sitio.
We are our own worst enemy.
A true understanding of reality is freedom.
I believe that music is communication.
The internet has had an enormous democratizing effect on many, many different things.
¿Será cierto que estos tipos pueden cambiar el mundo? ¿Y si todo era solamente una broma del destino?
Most adults do not believe in children.
Todo lo que tienes, han robado el pan del día.
El producto final de la cultura solidaria es la justicia alimentaria.
The conditions that people are living under today inevitably will cause them to question the system itself.
Viajar no es solamente viajar de un lado a otro, sino que también es viajarse, viajar en mí.
How can you imagine that you can really predict flapping of wings of every butterfly in the world? The world itself is unpredictable.
La naturaleza, decía Wilde, imita al arte. Y es verdad, si se proyectaban en un plano líneas rectas, siguiendo la lógica de las curvas del caracol, todo coincidía, como si el número áureo y la guía de teléfonos se hubieran unido para dar un resultado exacto.
In Buddhism, the root is altruistic love.
We have no other choice than to take care of what is here.
Porque no es posible la no violencia, es decir, porque no es posible.
If we all choose in our own way to make the world a better place, then it does make a difference.
Si el mundo iba a cambiar, lo haría de la mano de un cartógrafo con pinta de hippie, de un monje pelado de sonrisa amable, un violinista hindú de 20 y pico, un emprendedor de la web que inventó una enciclopedia mundial, un maestro noruego, 2 trabajadores sociales argentinos, un cantante, un visionario de internet y racimos de jóvenes indignados de Madrid y Nueva York. Parece poco cada vez que repaso la lista, pero las revoluciones siempre empiezan con una pequeña idea que luego encarna en los demás. Cruzo un puente que se construye mientras avanzo por él. No sé dónde termina, no sé hacia dónde me lleva, pero sé que en ese lugar cambiará mi vida. Toda tormenta empieza con una brisa y es difícil saber si esa brisa se convertirá o no en un vendaval. Nadie puede manejar el viento. Este viento comenzó a soplar en París, entre las páginas de un libro con título de orden al lector, Indignez-vous, y no ha parado de soplar aún. El viento se hizo tormenta en Madrid y lluvia en Nueva York. El agua llevaba enojo, frustración, promesas incumplidas, jóvenes a los que el futuro se les había escurrido entre las manos y le pedían a la democracia que mereciera su propio nombre. partido político ni un ejército, aunque sus actos daban cuenta de una guerra, la que libran contra los abusos del poder, los bancos, los juegos de la bolsa, los ajustes. Como Bartleby en el cuento de Melville, esta es la historia de quienes dijeron que no.
We strike and nothing happens. We march and nothing happens. We can't go home and close the door because we don't have sufficient income. What do we do? I think that we are now, as a result of the Occupy movement, in a stage where people are asking that question. Where do we go from here? It's reached a point now that only 9% of the U.S. people have a positive view of Congress. 91% negative. This Occupy Wall Street, like the Indignados in Spain, becomes a focal point for all the silent majorities that are frustrated and angry and hostile to the political institutions. No one trusts any politician.
Yo creo que es una cosa que tenemos muy clara. Nosotros lo que estamos pidiendo es una participación ciudadana en la política desde la base y que vaya más allá de introducir una papeleta, una urna cada 4 años. Por lo tanto, nosotros no vamos a convertirnos en un partido para participar de la misma manera en este sistema únicamente copado por partidos. Nosotros participamos como ciudadanos, desde la base, como sociedad civil que tiene unas demandas y que la expresa su clase política. Y eso es lo que nosotros somos, una plataforma ciudadana.
I think this country is due for some change. And I think the people who are trying to make change happen right now have everyone's best interest in mind. We're not out to wreck the middle class or wreck the working class. That's what we're here to repair that. And we're not here to take anyone's money away from them that they've earned. We're just saying, like, listen, you know, if you're working 40 hours a week, you should be making enough money to get by. To not just get by, but to have a life, you know, to have a regular life. And I think that that's kind of what was going on in our country during that time.
We live under capitalism. It wasn't the first system to exist, and I don't think it will be the last. I mean, it came after other ways of organizing society that had become old and rotten, and it emerged as a new way to organize society that was the most advanced thing at the time. And when you look at things, why things the way they are, it's the system to blame. It's that system based on inequality and based on profits for the few at the expense of many. And so the question of revolution becomes an obvious one, because you say, well, if we want to change these things, despite whatever mild reforms are promised by the politicians, and we've seen how great those have been in the, since Obama was elected, I mean, absolutely nothing has improved in the lives of average people. when you see the reality of the situation of this system that's based on a tiny, rich few ruling over everyone else and at the expense of everyone else, you of course have to question the system, and a change in the system, only comes through a revolution.
That's why the Occupy Wall Street movement was such a big breakthrough, because people finally said, I'm sitting down, I'm not going to accept this anymore. And suddenly, this little movement in a little square facing huge Wall Street suddenly became a protagonist of a national current of opinion overnight. I mean, if you had said to me something like this was going to happen a week before it happened, I'd say, impossible. Impossible.
If people work together and if people come up with solid reasons about why they want change, then it can happen.
They didn't listen to us, nothing has changed, and we can't continue on the way we're going. What should we do?
Por fin la sociedad está despertando y la gente quiere salir a la calle y quiere demostrar que tiene ideas, que tiene las cosas claras.
All because this tiny group of very rich people says that this is how society has to be organized, this is just the way it is, we have to accept it. That's not an equation that can be maintained for long.
I grew up as a licenciado in the 50s, which was a terrible period. Conservative, passive, consumerist, in every way. The idea was to graduate from college, get a good job, get married, have a house, buy a car, have 2 children. That's it. That was the 50s.
James Petras tiene 74 años y viene de aquella época en que el mundo tenía un futuro. Cree que la globalización es el nuevo nombre del imperialismo y habla también de los nuevos privilegiados.
Beginning in the late 50s was a cultural reaction, bohemian beats, etc. And out of that came elementary democratic struggles for free speech, organizing against McCarthyism, repression, and only by it accelerated from, say, 59, 60 to 63, what had been initially a protest for democratic rights became an upheaval against an imperialist war, against entrenched segregation and violence. And by the late 60s, it generalized throughout the country. So in the course of 2 decades, we went from a very passive and submissive and conformist generation to a rebellious. So I think we are now in transition. The first part of the 21st century, the first decade, is like the 50s. And now we're like the equivalent, I would say, 2011 was what essentially like 1960. The beginnings of dissent, protests, generalized malestar.
Ross cree que las democracias actuales están en venta y representan un mundo centrado en la adoración de la riqueza. Enseña literatura en la Universidad de Nueva York y publicó un libro sobre mayo del 68.
Sartre had a wonderful phrase about 68 where he said, Vietnam opened the field of the possible. So it was really Vietnam, it was really that war that made 68 possible, and it did so by making it making other things possible, you know. So there is a kind of a chain reaction that goes on where when what people feel that they are allowed to think or even see alters. I mean, you can see that very clearly throughout all of these movements in Spain and particularly in the Middle East, where people have not been used to being able to speak or make themselves visible in any way. You could think about them as rearrangements or moments when things accelerate to such a point that the very form of what we can think of as possible changes.
And it's Jerry Ashton once again with 15 minutes of fact. Our best attempt to be able to deliver to people who are listening to our radio program the actual sounds and voices of the people who have something to say about Occupy Wall Street, sometimes as participants, sometimes as critics, sometimes as people who somehow or another just fell into its embrace and are doing things about it.
Jerry Ashton se presenta a sí mismo como un solucionador de problemas. Era, en realidad, un cobrador de deudas que ahora terminó uniéndose a los indignados de Wall Street.
At my age, I've been through a number of things where people have protested and tried to make their voices heard with varying degrees of success. Vietnam War. Well, at that time, I was a young businessman, married. Or was I married by that time? No? Yes. And I hated the war. Many people hated the war, just like we hate the war today. And just as back then, the government was steadfast in pursuing war, and it took people by the hundreds of thousands to come out. So I look at Occupation Wall Street as being seminal, that what it's being able to do now, which is over 100 cities in the United States and it's worldwide, finally galvanizing people, even if it wakes them up to make them angry. It's a little bit like Paul Revere, when he was riding through town. I'm sure he woke up some people who complained that they were awakened, and other people decided to get their guns. So I'm looking for this to be a wake-up call for America.
Mike Prisner fue soldado en Irak. Mi comandante sonreía con presunción pensando que había engañado a todo un país, le escribió Prisner en una carta a Michael Moore. Yo supe, al poco tiempo, que no podía sentirme orgulloso de mis actos.
When you're talking about evicting millions of families from their homes, And then those homes, you know, brand new homes that people can live in are bulldozed to the ground by banks, which is happening all over the country right now. I mean, if a bomb destroyed thousands of homes, leaving the families homeless, I mean, that would be considered an act of war, a crime. But the banks are doing that. I mean, when you tell thousands of people here in LA alone who are receiving HIV and AIDS treatment that there's been budget cuts to those services, so now that that treatment is cut off, those people will die. I mean, if I went and killed 2,000 people, that would be considered an act of war. But it's not when the government does it. It's not when the big corporations do it. And so that's a war that's taking place here in the United States between these two interests. But the war that we're seeing abroad, and the war that I was a part of, was essentially the same thing. I mean, it was the rich, it was the billionaires saying that we want access to these raw materials, we want access to these resources, you must do business with the biggest business on the planet, or you're going to be targeted for destruction. War today, and the wars that we're looking at, they're imperialist wars. They're wars for empire. I mean, it's these giant superpowers, you know, led by this tiny fraction of the population, this tiny group of really just a few hundred billionaires who are able to use all of the institutions of society at their disposal to achieve their interests. And in this era, it's used to conquer independent, developing countries that don't accept the domination of Wall Street.
I don't know if you're aware of just how shut down this country has been in terms of the war on terror, for example, and the way in which that has just created a kind of seamless integration of the media, the state, and the military, so that these three things are operating together in a kind of a lockstep. So anything that, you know, any opening that can be achieved that really makes people feel as though they are the slightest bit empowered in any way is enormous. And now, of course, you know, what we have are police that are outfitted in, you know, paramilitary equipment that they've had funded by the war of terror, and they are directing that on their own citizens. In the, you know, when, for example, when Zuccotti Park was vacated under Bloomberg.
I was here during the eviction. I was here, I was locking arms, and there was a lot of fear there. We were losing the park. There were riot police surrounding us. We knew we were going to get arrested, but it stopped being a choice for me to leave the park, to leave what became my home. And though I had that fear in me, I acted in accordance to my principles.
Ronnie Núñez es dominicano y trabaja como suplente en escuelas públicas. Fue parte de la ocupación en Zuccotti Park y decidió quedarse a vivir en la plaza.
At least especially being in New York, you may support something, you may be for something, but that doesn't mean you'll necessarily make the effort to go and do anything about it. And I'm so glad I'm not that person anymore. I think freedom's a right that we all have, and when you have it taken away from you, you understand so much more why you need to fight for it.
Es editor general de Economía del Huffington Post, un sitio con 37 millones de usuarios únicos al mes. Escribió sobre el fin del dinero fácil y la renovación de la economía estadounidense.
In 2007, I started working at the New York Times late in 2007. It was October, and I was the national economic correspondent, and I thought, well, it's exciting to be at the Times, but national economy, how important a job is that right now? That's kind of a sleepy story. I'm really curious to know what's going to happen to consumer spending, which is 70% of the American economy, if people can't borrow against the value of their homes any longer. You know, what happens? And I went out to a place where people had been borrowing exuberantly against soaring home values, a place called Reno, Nevada. What I found there was really disturbing. I mean, I met all these people who were in their 30s who had filled their homes with flat screen TVs, clothes, who had bought 4 and 5 speculative houses, to flip, to make money. I met a guy, the lead character in this story, who told me, yeah, I used to just buy a truck every time I got tired of the color of the old truck. And now he was selling everything. He was never going out to eat anymore. His shopping trips to the mall were over. He was trying to figure out whether to file for bankruptcy or just walk away from these houses and send. It was the first time I heard the term jingle mail. You took your keys, you put them in an envelope, and you sent them to the bank instead of your mortgage payment. You would go to a dinner party in the 1990s, and people weren't talking about sports or politics or the weather or where they went on vacation. They were talking about which NASDAQ stock could they buy on Monday morning and sell on Tuesday afternoon for 200% profit. So suddenly, the brightest minds in Washington were focused on getting regulations out of the way of these fantastic wizards on Wall Street who had all of these fantastic ways of creating wealth out of thin air. Well, so that proved to be a disaster. And I think people in Spain, as in Greece, as in Italy, and to a degree in the States, understand that there's no plan to invest in economic growth because we're so busy trying to cut everything that we're not having a conversation that we really need to have about, how are we going to get ourselves moving again? How are we going to create millions of jobs so that we can get over the fantasy that you can spend money that you don't bring home from work and actually generate, millions of paychecks?
Democracy as we know it, as elections between elites financed by powerful economic interests, that is already discredited. People are angry, but there's a fear here. I'll tell you, there is one difference. We had McCarthyism when I was a student at investigations by the federal police of anybody that was socialist, communist, or whatever. Now we have a huge national security state, homeland security, anti-terrorist ideology, much more pervasive political constraints by the state apparatus. And that is a limiting factor on people's protests. Who's being investigated? Now everybody's IT, email, faxes, telephones, you assume everything is being watched, that you're in some kind of a file, una ficha. And we know that there are millions of people now There's 800,000 functionaries working for Homeland Security, collecting billions of items. Now, the only hope in that is they collect so much information they can't analyze it all.
Politicians run America's public with fear. Fear of the communists, fear of the socialists, fear of the Muslims, fear of the Democrats, fear of the Republicans, fear of the Tea Party. Fear, fear, fear. So what happens is that those who are indignant or tired of the labels, don't call me a socialist, don't call me a this or that. Just get the job done of making this country better.
There is so much fear of socialism. It is absurd. And it has its base in the 50s during McCarthyism, where the Senator McCarthy was just like red listing all of these people and saying that they were communists. And then over time, socialism became the same thing as communism. And it's not the same thing as socialism.
Mónica Catchpole tiene 22. Ganaba $400 a la semana y se enfrentó con el Bank of America, negándose a pagar un recargo de $5 cada vez que usaba su tarjeta de débito. Molly dijo no, y logró que en pocas semanas 300.000 personas firmaran su petitorio y más de 21.000 amenazaran con cerrar sus cuentas.
Socialism isn't a bad thing. And it's just kind of like about making sure that your neighbor has health care. You know what I mean? And that just feeling like we can all care about one another and kind of work together and make our lives better. You know, so I don't understand this fear of socialism, because our country isn't going to become the socialist country overnight. That's not going to happen under the reign of President Obama. You know, that's not going to happen. So it's just this ridiculous fear.
People have been taught to disengage from the system, to feel powerless, and so they don't even attempt to try to participate in the democratic process. So really a major push that this movement's been about is just about getting people involved in the process.
In a lot of the press, they're portrayed as these, you know, crazy radicals, revolutionaries, when the things that they were asking for just seemed so not only sensible but uncontroversial. There ought to be jobs for people. People ought not to be thrown out of their homes. It would be good if we did not find ourselves writing $700 billion checks to large financial institutions while, you know, not helping people who are out of work. I mean, the more I thought about it, the more I came to see it as really, if it worked, a reclaiming of middle-class values in America. Immediately bumped into this guy who's 25 years old, and he was wearing a dress shirt and a tie, and he had a dollar bill like taped over his mouth. There's a guy who has a job on Wall Street, and he had a sign that said something like, you know, I could be fired for expressing my opinion. And I started to talk to him and ask him, what do you think we should do about this? I mean, how do we fix these problems, this vulnerability to another financial crisis? And he said, well, why would you ask me? I mean, I'm 25 years old. If you expect I'm going to have the answers, then we really have a problem. And I found that so incredibly refreshing, that instead of pretending that they're, you know, the vanguard of some political movement that, you know, like Moses on top of the mountain can just hand down all of the answers, they were essentially saying, we don't know exactly what to do, but we know that the people who are in positions of power and influence ought to be spending some of their time figuring out how to restore promise to American economic opportunity. This is not a revolution, it's a renaissance.
A veces parece que el viento hubiera dejado de soplar. No es así. Solo vuelve a transformarse en brisa. Se cuela por los pasillos, por las copas de los árboles, vuelve a crecer.
Sometimes when I think about this, I think about the civil rights movement. And people were saying, you know, was Martin Luther King necessary because he was like the great man? Or was it the grassroots organizations and the people, you know, the freedom riders? Was it because of them? He was necessary as a voice, and that it was kind of the smaller movements behind it that really powered change. But, you know, and then part of me thinks that this is a little bit different in that you can't have a leader. It can get dangerous, and it can get, it'll alienate people, I think. Because I think that the movement has the potential to reach across the political spectrum and to take people who are on the fence, people who are independent, people who are even a little bit right-leaning, and involve them. And I think if there's a leader, people like that will be scared off.
The person is never as important as the message or the movement that they start. And that's how I feel about myself. I'm not as important as this movement. I don't think anybody here is.
And when you look at things, why things the way they are, it's the system to blame.
Get the job done of making this country better.
This is not a revolution, it's a renaissance.
The elite are panicked at this point, and they're panicked because it's simply something that is completely outside of their realm of control, and so they have to control it from the right by, you know, singling out the, you know, personalizing the protesters and saying that they're envious or dirty or hippies or, you know, something like that.
Well, you also look in history and see how change is created, to see how progressive victories are won, how we have the right to an 8-hour day and unemployment insurance, why women have the right to vote, why African Americans aren't meant to use separate bathrooms and separate facilities, why, you know, it's illegal to lynch people. I mean, all of these things, I mean, these progressive gains that have been won throughout society, you know, major victories for the majority of people in the country, they've never been handed down from a politician. I mean, they've never been won through elections. In every case of every real progressive victory that's ever happened in the United States has been through a people's movement. It's been through a struggle. It's been through saying, not voting with the promise that a politician is going to do a certain thing, but scaring that politician and scaring the government into thinking that if we don't make this concession, we're going to get overthrown.
The idea that there's no leader isn't true, because they are all leaders. And that's annoying to our own governmental form, which is hierarchically. I'm the boss, you're not. It goes like that. And what the movement says is, no, I'm the boss and you're the boss. And I'll boss my stuff and you boss your stuff. And let's work together and we'll boss stuff together.
It clearly is trying very hard to not be a political movement, because once you become a political movement, then there are metrics to measure your success or failure. There's a kind of conventional thing that happens, and you have to maintain yourself as an organ of power, and then you have all of the same problems that all institutions have. I think fundamentally what they've succeeded in doing is changing the conversation. But clearly, I mean, the nature of the political conversation and the idea conversation and the sense of American identity has changed. I mean, even just in the last few weeks.
We are in the midst in a huge counter-revolution. Everything that social changes took place in 50 years. Very profound counter-revolution right now. It's still moving forward. Increasing resistance and rejection of these specific. But if you put it all together, employment, wages, inequalities, social benefits, working conditions, all of these areas are going backwards. So at some point, if there's counter-revolution, there has to be revolution. I think the counter-revolution is still creating the basis for a significant revolution.
One of the reasons is that when I was a young person, it was a long time ago, half a century or more, the main question seems to me to be, at that time, what is to be done? But today, the main question, in my view, is not what is to be done, because on that topic we can come together, discuss it, and come to some sort of a consensus. But the question, who is going to do it? It is a question of instrument of collective action. That is what we are actually missing.
¿Pensás que se puede cambiar el mundo?
Yo creo que es complicado, cada vez es más difícil, pero yo creo que sí, que se puede cambiar el mundo. Se puede cambiar el mundo partiendo desde los ciudadanos, partiendo desde las sociedades civiles y utilizando las nuevas herramientas que tenemos a nuestra disposición. Las nuevas tecnologías pueden ayudar muchísimo en este aspecto. Y la clave para esto es que nos pongamos de acuerdo los ciudadanos, no ya solo de España, no ya solo de un país, sino de todos. A nivel internacional, la mayor parte de los ciudadanos de a pie, la gente de clases medias, bajas, están sufriendo los mismos problemas. Yo creo que el mundo se puede cambiar entre todos, utilizando las herramientas que están a nuestro alcance y coordinando un movimiento ciudadano global.
I think we're already seeing who's going to do it. It's the people. I mean, it's the most affected sectors of society. It's the dispossessed. It's the unemployed. It's the foreclosed. It's the students who are in debt. It's the young people who can't find a job. It's the people who have watched their family members die in hospitals because they couldn't get treatment. I mean, those are the people that will be pushing society forward, because it's those people, which is the most of us in this country and most of us in the world, we're the ones who see the reality of the system and see the change that needs to be made. And those are the people who, by nature, will be the ones who are fighting for change and the ones who are winning change, because it's only those of us who are affected by the current situation and who are hurt by it that are going to be compelled to act. And so it's those people who are on the bad end of this deal that will be the agents of change.
In America, it's more important to save the trillions of dollars that are reserved for the so-called shareholders rather than for the stakeholders, which are the American citizens. Enough is enough.
I think it's really important to start local, because if you start local, then that change can influence bigger and bigger and bigger.
It's already happening. People are concerned with changing their own lives right now.
If now the government is trying to smash it with such violence, I mean, imagine what it will resort when it begins to grow and when there's actually real victories on the horizon.
It's healthy that we're now talking about our problems in a way in which we weren't, a few months ago.
I don't think that systems change because of their internal contradictions. People that think about things and make them happen.
Does a revolution seem that far-fetched? I mean, there's this quote of one of the leaders who afterwards says, every revolution is impossible until it happens, and then it was always inevitable.
es difícil que el viento deje de soplar. Decía Jean Paul Sartre que la verdad es como una venda, que cuando se corre de los ojos no puede volver nunca al mismo lugar en el que estaba.